Kept you all waiting, huh? Yeah, for nearly half a year we're getting back to the series that started it all on this channel, Goat Guides. And today we're looking at what might be the best aggro deck in the format, Warrior Toolbox. Even though I personally prefer Beasts Down and Gravekeepers when doing aggressive strategies, I can't deny if you want a top tier aggro deck, then Warriors are by far the most powerful and consistent, often being in the top 3 or 4 decks of the whole meta. As the name suggests, the deck focuses on the warrior type, which along with the zombies was probably the most defined type of monster with the most amount of good cards built deck around in the game at the time, thanks to several sets in early Yu-Gi-Oh! Being at least partially themed around them. So let's not waste any more time and get right into it. Now normally I begin these videos by looking at a monster card, but as usual when a spell is the core of a deck, we talk about it first. Reinforcements of the Army is a normal spell that allows us to search any 4 or lower warrior monster from the deck to our hand, and somehow this card is at 2 this format. I don't think I have to explain how powerful this card is, but just remember this: every powerful warrior I mention in this video, we essentially have 2 extra copies of. Now let's get to the monsters. The first and smallest of our warriors is Mystic Swordsman level 2. A 900 attack warrior, Swordsman has the ability to immediately destroy any face down monster without flipping it. I chose to start here because the Swordsman gives us a good idea of what this deck wants to do. We want to be attacking a lot in this deck, and we also want to disrupt our opponent's monster effects. Now if you know anything about GOAT format, you know that monsters like Magician of Faith, Morphing Jar and Magical Merchant dominate the format, as they're able to both recur broken cards, draw tons of other broken cards, and help search for more broken cards. So in this deck we run several cards like this that can destroy flip monsters without actually flipping them up, thus preventing their effects from going off. Before moving on, I should mention you could also run the level 4 Swordsman, which is the same effect with a 1900 attack body. However, the problem with this card is that it must be summoned in face down defense, if not brought out using level 2's rank up effect. Because of this, most builds exclude him for being too slow. However, if you really want to shut down flip monsters, you could also run this as an additional option. Our next soldier in our war against flip monsters is Blade Knight, a level 4 with 600 base attack points. If you have no other monster on the field, Blade Knight negates the effect of all flip monsters it destroys. In addition to this, if you have 1 or fewer cards in hand, Blade Knight gains 400 attack points. So while nowhere near as good as Mystic Swordsman, Blade Knight is still a powerful way we can prevent flip effects from activating. However, where Blade Knight excels is being arguably the best top deck we have, as not only will it have the flip monster negation, it will likely be bigger than most monsters our opponents can bring out. In addition to these cards taking out face down defense monsters, we also have Ninja Grandmaster Suzuki, which when attacking a face up defense position monster automatically destroys it at the start of the damage step. The most obvious use of this card is to beat over high defense monsters, but there's so much more it can do. For example, the best use of Grandmaster is outing Spirit Reaper. A 300 attack zombie, Reaper can't be destroyed by battle, but will destroy itself if targeted. This card may be small, but it can be an absolute pain to deal with in some GOAT matches, especially for aggro decks who will often lose if they give control too much time to set up. So having another way in the main to pop this card that's also a very good beater is very welcome in this kind of strategy. A slightly unconventional use of the Grandmaster is its combination with Mirror Force. By far the most powerful back row in the format, Mirror Force will destroy all attack position monsters upon attack. And because of this, many players in GOAT format play very conservatively, summoning either 1 monster, or if they do summon 2, they'll often place their most valuable monster in defense before attacking if they fear a Mirror Force. Therefore, if you have a Mirror Force set face down, or if you're very good at bluffing, one thing you can do is trick your opponent into setting, for example, their BLS into defense, and then using the Grandmaster as a follow-up to take out their best monster with ease. It's a bit of a weird thing, as it's not really a combo in the traditional sense of the word, but it's definitely something to keep in mind when playing this card. Moving on from the defense busters, we take a look at the staple warriors. These are the cream of the crop in terms of warrior monsters, the ones not just played in every warrior deck, but in most GOAT decks in general. These are mostly come in the form of removal or very powerful effects. First up we have Exiled Force, a level 4 Earth Warrior. Exiled Force is simple yet powerful. Upon summoning you contribute it to destroy 1 monster on the field. Now this is already a powerful removal, however in old school Yu-Gi-Oh! It's even more so due to the game mechanic known as Priority, or the ability to activate any ability as Chain Link 1. This means that if the opponent wants to stop this card from destroying their monster, they couldn't bottomless trap hole it, they need to do something like Solemn Judgment it. Now Exile Force is a powerful piece of removal, but due to the prominence of Chaos decks, it may not be always the best to put monsters into the graveyard. When that is the case, we turn to our next monster, DD Warrior Lady. A 1500 attack light warrior, DD Warrior Lady has the ability to banish any monster she battles. This means that Warrior Lady can be used to both out problematic monsters and also make it harder for Chaos decks to summon boss monsters, as she can banish the lights and dark side of the grave. Basically, this card is both a good way to stop BLS from hitting the board, and one of the best ways to remove it if it does hit the board. For our next staple warrior, we have Don Zalug. A level 4 Dark Warrior monster, Zalug has the ability that upon dealing battle damage, it can either make the opponent discard a card at random, or mill 2 cards from the top of their deck. Now to a modern Yu-Gi-Oh player, the choice of which effect to use seems pretty obvious, and to be fair, yes, usually you do want to be discarding cards from your opponent's hand, as it depletes their resources. However, don't underestimate the mill in a much slower game state. While nowadays milling the opponent is an awful idea to the amount of graveyard effects, these were far less prominent back in 2005. Also, keep in mind, GOAT format is essentially a format built on limited cards. From the Trinity to Sangan to Triumphing Virus to BLS himself, many of the most powerful cards in this format are limited to 1 and are often hard to get back once in the graveyard. Therefore, if the opponent is low on cards in hand, it can sometimes be worth it to attempt to mill these important cards away. Again, I wouldn't use this effect too much, but I also wouldn't completely discount it either. Finally, in our staple monsters, we have the big man himself, the strongest monster in GOAT format, Blackluster Soldier, Envoy of the Beginning. I said this in a GOAT control video, but BLS and CD really were the first iterations of the broken boss monster, with their easily swimming conditions and powerful effects. In the case of BLS, he is a 3000 attack card that can either attack twice on the same turn, or banish a monster at the cost of not being able to attack. The blue eyes stats make this card borderline impossible to beat in battle, and his 2 effects likely will mean a short game if he is not quickly dealt with. There's a reason most decks in GOAT format bend over backwards to accommodate this guy. He is simply the best card in the format, and you'd be a fool not to include him if you can. So we covered the most standard warriors played in the deck. However, when you have a card that can search any card of your archetype, it's no surprise many warrior players have experimented with their own techs and crazy choices. So before we move on, let's look at a couple of these, shall we? First up, for those who want to be really aggressive in their warrior toolbox strategy, we have Mataza the Zapper. A 1300 attack dark warrior, Mataza is not only a dark to add to the chaos themes, but can both attack twice in the same turn and can have its control switched. Now the first effect is excellent for our beatdown strategy, as on a clean field Mataza can deliver up to 2600 points of damage from a direct attack, and he can also take out 2 low defense monsters like Faith and Merchant in 1 turn. However, the second effect of this card is surprisingly useful, as it means the opponent can't just take him with Snatch Steal or Mind Control, 2 of the most powerful spells in the format outside of the Trinity. Another tech that some people run in Warrior Toolbox for similar reasons to Mataza is GEARFRIED the Iron Knight. An 1800 attack warrior, GEARFRIED automatically pops any card equipped to him. Again, this gives the deck Snatch Steal protection, however that's just the tip of the iceberg what this card can do. There are 2 cards in GOAT that are both equips and gain effects when destroyed, and both can be combined to great effect with GEARFRIED. Smoke Raider the Thief, a card you may remember if you played during for Noble Knight format, is an equip that when sent to the graveyard allows us to look at the opponent's hand and discard a random card. That's right, if you're willing to increase the odds of bricking, you can potentially play Confiscation in this deck. The other one is a trap known as Blast Held by Chain, a normal trap that upon activation equips to a monster and gives it a 500 point buff. Again, that won't matter because when this card falls off GEARFRIED it turns into a removal spell and pops 1 monster on the field. While not as powerful in a vacuum as Smoke Grenade, I would argue this card is technically better because this has the purpose of both being a slight power boost equipped to another monster, but a very powerful effect with GEARFRIED, unlike Smoke Grenade which is a brick if not played with GEARFRIED. In addition to this, if you want to play a more casual version of this deck, you can take the GEARFRIED synergies one step further and add a GEARFRIED the Swordmaster package. However, due to the brickiness of these cards and the minus in card advantage it creates, this is a purely casual engine that I wouldn't recommend for any competitive builds. Finally, if you want to lean heavier on either the Chaos or Beatdown strategies, one final option to play is Zombira the Dark. In addition to being one of the very few cards that references the Yu-Gi-Oh manga, Zombira is a 2100 attack Dark Warrior. And that's literally the only reason he sees play in this deck at all, as he can't attack directly and loses 200 points per attack, so this guy is only played for his attribute and as an early game beat stick. Outside of these cards, there are two directions we can go in terms of the rest of the deck's monster lineup. If you wish to make a warrior toolbox strategy where the warriors are an engine to prop up a traditional goat strategy, then the rest of the monsters should be the usual goat staples that have decent stats to help with the beatdown, like Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer, Breaker the Magical Warrior, and Tribe Infecting Virus. If you wish to make it more of a pure warrior strategy, then cards like Marauding Captain and Freed the Matchless General are your best options, as Freed will grant you a search every turn instead of your draw, while Marauding Captain can both push summon another warrior from your hand in order to push through damage and protect all your other warriors from attacks by being the only monster that can be attacked. Also, if you have two of these captains on the field, this effect will stack, meaning the opponent will be able to attack you as long as you have two captains face up on the field. Moving on to the spells, we'll begin with, like usual, the Trinity. Being an aggro deck, cards like Graceful Charity and Pot of Greed will help us in the event the game goes longer than we'd like by somewhat refilling our hand. However, I'd argue in this particular deck, Delinquent Doe is actually the best of these three cards. As I said, being an aggro deck, it's likely we will be top decking fairly early in this game, and we'll be playing at least one monster each turn, and we'll be actively using our backward to clear the way for direct attacks. Because of this, keeping our opponent at low cards is important, as we like it to win any top deck war, as our deck will tend to have a higher quality of cards. So because of this, we run all the good hand attack cards we can in this deck, including not just Duo and Don Zalug as said earlier, but also Trap Dust Shoot. Next up in our staple core, we run Snatch Steel and Back Row Hate in Heavy Storm and Mystical Space Typhoon. Now, these cards may seem dissimilar, but I put them together because they serve the same purpose of clearing fields. Snatch Steel is our best non-monster way of clearing monsters in this deck, as not only does it remove a body from the board, it puts that body on our side to deliver additional damage. MST and Heavy Storm meanwhile serve their usual purpose in this deck of clearing out strong back row like Mirror Force and Sakuretsu Armor that can kill our monsters. However, in this deck that's even more important than usual, because losing a lot of monsters is something that we can't really recover from, and we need a lot of monsters to deliver quick beatdown damage to win in a reasonable time. Because of this, we also run several spells in this deck with the aim of protecting our monsters. First up, we have a returning card from my Gravekeeper's video in My Body as a Shield, which for the cost of 1500 life points, protects your monsters from being destroyed by card effects. Again, much like in Keepers, we're trying to win quickly and our monsters are much more important than our life points, so this card is extremely powerful in this deck, as is our next card in Book of Moon. A quick play spell, Book allows us to flip any card face down as a quick effect. Now, like Body, this card can be used defensively to save a monster from, say, a Mirror Force and the like, but with our previously mentioned Flip Destroyers, this card can also be used offensively to pop any monster, especially when combined with our final spell, Noble Man of Crossout. A normal spell, Noble Man allows us to banish one face-down monster, and then if it was a flip effect, like say Gravekeeper's Spy, we banish all additional copies of that card. Now, as I said, this card combines very well with Book of Moon, but with decks like Chaos and Gravekeepers being some of the top decks in the format, it often works very well by itself, banishing cards like Magician of Faith or the aforementioned Gravekeeper's Spy. Now, if you wish, you could also run other removal cards like Lightning Vortex and RAIGEKI Break for additional board clearing. However, given the usual lack of cards we'll have late game in our hands, these cards can be a bit of a brick if we have nothing to discard to them, so run them by preference, but I would personally say either side deck them or just don't bother. Finally, looking at the trap cards, we'll begin with the most powerful card in any aggro deck, and that's Solemn Judgment. For the cost of half your life points, this card can negate any monster, spell or trap. I've mentioned this card in other GOAT guides, and I've often said this cost is worth it in aggro decks, as often they win fast enough that the life point loss won't matter, while countering the opponent's most powerful card will definitely matter. However, since making those videos, a few things have changed in GOAT format, most notably the increase in the amount of burn decks, particularly Panda burn decks in the format. With this deck now being one of the top decks in the game, it's become far risky to play this card, as in this matchup it will either be a dead draw or a free burn spell for the opponent. Now, this isn't to say that aggro decks should stop running this card, far from it, it's just that when you do run it, make sure to be aware of Panda burn, and make sure you've got something good to side this out for. Next up in the aggro staples we have Trap Dust Shoot. If your opponent has 4 or more cards in their hand, this card lets you look at their hand and shuffle one card back into the deck. Like Don Zalug, Duo and Smoke Grenade, we play this card to both eliminate problem cards from our opponent's hand and bring the game to a simplified game state in the late, so that we can always win a top deck war. However, what makes Dust Shoot unique compared to these cards is the fact that it's a trap, meaning it can be used at quick play speed to, for example, eliminate Sangan searches. Outside of the aggro staple cards, the rest of our trap lineup is pretty standard. Firstly, we have Torrential Tribute to wipe the opponent's field if it gets too big. Although one thing I will say is we need to time this card better than in most decks because we can't really afford to lose too many of our own monsters to this card, meaning this card is often used as a comeback enabler in this deck. In addition to this, we have Mirror Force, the best trap card in the format, which upon the opponent attacking destroys all face-up monsters they control in attack position. Again, even more so than Torrential, Mirror Force is an excellent way of clearing fields. But as I briefly explained in my Grandmaster Sasuke section, this card can also be used by skilled players to just play mind games with the opponent by making them hesitate to fully commit to attacking, and thus leaving their monsters in defense and open to Grandmaster plays like I mentioned earlier. Next up in our trap lineup is Sakuretsu Armor. Essentially a mini Mirror Force, Armor destroys one attacking monster. And while obviously this is far less powerful than Mirror Force, it more than makes up for this by being at 3 as opposed to 1. Finally, in our removal arsenal we have Ring of Destruction, a normal trap card that upon being activated destroys any monster on the field and then deals damage to both players equal to that monster's attack points. I'm pretty sure I mentioned this in my Gravekeeper's video, but in an aggro deck, Ring may be the best removal, because not only is it the most flexible, hitting any monsters regardless of phase or position, but if used on a big monster, this card can either sort of win the game, or reduce the player's turn count significantly by taking a huge chunk of their life points. Also, if you have no way of winning the game, the pre-drafted version of this card which we play can be used to end the game in a draw if you've got no conscience, you monster. Finally, to complement the monster removal we've seen, we have Dust Tornado. Essentially a mystical space typhoon in trap form, Tornado also has a bonus ability that after it pops a back row, we can set one of our own back row. While this effect is admittedly very narrow, it can be used to save a card in hand from hand attack and morphing jar effects. Again, in a deck like this that will often prevent jars from activating, this effect will barely come up, but it's a nice little bonus to remember 1 in every 100 games. In conclusion, as chaos decks full of flip monsters and jar decks built around them, along with decks like Burn, take up more and more of the GOAT meta, Warrior Toolbox will likely see more and more play as a counter to these decks, for its quick gameplay and disruptive monster effects. While it likely will never be the best deck in GOAT, it will always be a strong contender, and one you need to watch out for if you play GOAT a lot. Thank you all for watching, and next time we're going to be taking on the big dog in Chaos. See you again soon, guys.